Good morning, everyone, and welcome. If you could all go ahead and please mute yourself, that would be super helpful. And in case you're wondering what that graphic was, the picture, our meditation labyrinth that is out in the parking lot that we painted in December, Sharon Godding is working on making the center of that even more beautiful and welcoming. So she is painting that tree of life there. And she's just about done, and we'll make sure and share that with you whenever she's finished. And of course, you're all welcome to come in any time and walk the meditation labyrinth, but I think that's such a beautiful addition to that piece of work out in our parking lot. So thank you so much to Sharon again for doing that. So welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Charlotte County. I'm Dan Lambert, and I serve this congregation as minister. Our progressive, welcoming, and inclusive, judgment-free congregation is a liberal religious community of diverse and free-thinking individuals. UUFCC is a spiritual community where reason and social justice matter. As people who learn, love, share, and serve together, we welcome all into our family. We begin our service each week by singing an invitation to gather, even as we are all scattered in many places because of the pandemic. So let's sing Enter, Rejoice, and Zoom in, and please clap your hands and sing out loud even as you remain muted.
I just call and see anybody's alive out there.
Enter, rejoice, and so in. Enter, rejoice, and so in. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and so in. Don't be afraid of some change. Don't be afraid of some change. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and so in.
Our worship associate this morning is Sharon Whitehill, and she has some words for us as we light the chalice. Sharon, go ahead and unmute yourself and share those words with us, please.
Well, good morning. I am Sharon Whitehill, your worship associate today. And I ask you please to wait to light your chalice at home until after the affirmation. If ever there were a time for a candle in darkness, this would be it. Using the spark of hope, let us kindle the flame of love, ignite the light of peace, and feed the flame of justice.
Thank you, Sharon. Now I invite you to share our affirmation as we light the chalice. Love is the spirit of this fellowship, and service is its law. This is our aspiration, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth and love, and to help one another. I'll give you a moment now to go ahead and light your own chalice at home. Thank you. And Sharon, it's your turn to share opening words, please.
The opening words today are those of the Reverend William J. Barber III of Moral Mondays fame. Several of us heard him deliver a thrillingly dynamic sermon at General Assembly in Columbus a few years ago. And I must say, I almost became an evangelical myself after that. He has since that time been one of my very favorite ministers. So here are his words. The problem is, you got this guy, Jesus, who was the founder, and he was pretty clear. In the first sermon he preached, he said, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me to give me good news to the poor. Luke uses a Greek word for poor, patohos, meaning those who have been made poor because of exploitation. Barber goes on, I once met with Franklin Graham, and I asked him, have you ever even read the Bible? Have you ever even read the scriptures? He wouldn't answer. That's the problem for people like Graham and Falwell. They can't debate us publicly because there's no way they could say, we are against guaranteed health care for all, because Jesus was against guaranteed health care for all. Jesus never charged a leper co-pay. How can you stand up and say God is for the oppression of the poor when Isaiah in Isaiah 10 says, woe unto those who legislate evil and rob the poor of their right and make women and children their prey.
Thank you, Sharon. Reverend Barber also currently serves as a co-leader of the Poor People's Campaign, and he and that group has made quite the impact across the nation on behalf of those who struggle in many different ways. So thank you, Sharon, for sharing those words with us. Welcome again to everyone. It's great to have you with us. Today is, of course, Easter Sunday. For those who are from the Christian tradition, you know exactly what that means, but it's also the end of Passover for those from the Jewish tradition, and for our Muslim friends, the coming week also begins the month of Ramadan. And so it's a very unique confluence of lots of different important holidays and observances for the largest religions in the world. So it's a very special time, and we're glad that you're here. Also, if you're new with us or happen to be visiting, we'd love to find out who you are so we can say hello. We invite you to share your name and where you're from in the chat, just so that we can have a chance to say hello and make you feel welcome, even though we're not in person and we can't shake your hand or share hugs or anything like that quite yet. That day's coming, though. Our song for this morning from some members of the choir is called I Sought the Wood in Summer, and it's a new composition that they've been working on, and so this is the first time we'll be hearing it and sharing it together. You'll see the words on your screen, so we invite you to sing along at home as we enjoy I Sought the Wood in Summer.
I sought the wood in summer when every twig was green. The rudest boughs were tender and buds were pink between. Like fingered aspens trembled in fitful sun and shade, and daffodils were golden in every starry glade. How frail a thing is beauty, I said when every breath she gives the vagrant summer, but swift arrows her death. For this the stardust travels, for this hath ages rolled, to deck the wood for bridal and slay her with the cold. I saw the wood in winter when every leaf was dead. Behind the wind-whipped branches, the winter sun was red. seem more like to veil behind the rosa planet, the law behind the veil.
Wow, that was beautiful. I'm not familiar with that hymn. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I hope the rest of you enjoyed that and sang along as well. Now we move into our weekly member spotlight. And I am excited to say that Rosemary Hagan is joining us today to talk about her life a little bit. Now, if you've been around a while, this book looks familiar. That is Rosemary, who has had quite the fun and interesting life. And Rosemary, I think Rosemary, you're in your mid 90s, 95 maybe. Can we go ahead and, yeah, we can spotlight her and unmute her so she doesn't have to worry about that. And it is such an honor to have you with us to talk a little bit about your journey. I know I said about 5 minutes, so I don't know how you summarize 95 years of life in 5 minutes, but let's see what you can do. Tell us about where you've been, the things you've done, and why you are a UU today.
Thank you, Dan. I think I'd like to ask if you can hear me.
Yes, you're great.
Okay, good. There's something here that I'm going to just get rid of. That picture of the book, I was in Peru at the time, and this was a python, which was a pet of a 10-year-old. And he wanted everyone in the group to hold it. And he held it and handed the rest of the snake to me, which was 10 feet, and said, "Lady, we will take your picture." And I looked at this little boy and I looked at the snake and I said, "Little boy, I will hold the snake." And so I grabbed it and held it, and they took my picture. But I'm not going to talk about my travels particularly today. I'm going to talk about how we joined the Unitarian and Universalist Church and why we joined it. And I'm talking about my husband, Paul Hagan. We were members of this group for quite a while, and still are, as a matter of fact. Of course, Paul is dead. I've been a member of this congregation since 1989. I'm also a member of the Venice congregation, UCOV. I used to be a full-time member of this group, but I'm too old to drive this far, and I had to join UCOV instead. Actually, I am a humanist. Herb Levin, one of your members, and several other people in the audience are my humanist friends. We do not always agree, which is why we get on so well. And it's one of the reasons my husband, Paul Hagan, and I became Unitarians in 1949. We wanted a religion which did not insist on one way and allowed the individual churches to conduct their affairs as they saw fit. At the same time, we wanted a group that respected others. This was very important to us, respect for one another. We lived in Coon Rapids, Minnesota, and we joined the First Unitarian Society in Minneapolis. Carl Storm was the minister then. He was a gifted speaker and always saw the other side. At the same time, he had great objectivity and logic, which often destroyed the other side when he was arguing with it. We never tried to destroy the person. He understood that time takes care of people. It's ideas that last. Carl was always kind, objective in a way which made people think, even his opponents thought. Another thing we wanted in our religion was a group who believed in world community and world peace. We live in a world which includes our street. For as Chief Joseph, one of my favorite persons, said when he was trying to save his Indians, we are all connected. And he meant every person in the entire world, and the sky, and the air, and the water, and the trees, and the birds in the trees, etc., and etc. And we think that we as humans are in charge of this independent web. Have you asked a hurricane or a sunset lately if they know that we are in charge of them? So we joined the First Unitarian Church because of Carl Storm, and he immediately left for Liberty, Virginia, where Jerry Falwell had his church. Jerry was a far-right born-again Christian who not only had a church, he had God with him, according to his following anyway. He and God had a column in all of the important newspapers. Carl Storm had to battle this. I have no idea how he did. Paul and I then joined Michael Servetus Unitarian Society, located in Fridley, Minnesota, 10 miles from where we lived. The congregation was small, 10 or 15 people. It was made up of friends from the First Unitarian Society. They had started a new church. For 30 years, MSUS had no minister at all, but it grew to about 100 people. When Paul and I were there, the church people did sermons, visits. They got community members to come in and speak, and they spoke themselves. In this congregation, right now, there are two people who know Michael Servetus very well besides me. One is Ken Brennan, who was a member with his wife and two young girls. The other is Sharon Whitehill, who gave speeches to MSUS whenever she was in the area visiting her relatives. One of the things MSUS did was the annual auction. We started the idea of selling cars. I remember the time Paul and I and Connie and Pete were co-chairs. Somebody gave us a condo in Hawaii. Wow. Another tried to give us a 20-foot cement statue. Pete took care of the statue. He estimated the weight as about 2 tons, and he declared to the giver that MSUS did not have a truck big or strong enough to carry 2 tons, nor did we have a way to get it off the ground. We made a mint anyway with the 8 cars in the condo in Hawaii. So now Ken and I are at UUFCC. Paul and I joined in 1989. It did not have a regular minister then. The first minister they had was George Brooks, and he was hired half-time. He, of course, improved our membership so fast that we made him full-time very rapidly. We had a Reader's Theater then, and 2 members of this church were members of it then, Ginger Abraham and Stephanie Garrett. Bill Wharton used to do sound, and George Brooks and Herb Adams had parts now and then. Dick Stetson was a star, and Rusty, his first wife, and Beth, his second, were in it too, as were Emma Sparopoulos, Steve Karatzis, Paul Hagen, and me, who directed. At one time, we had 26 or 27 people in it. Sarah Zimmerman was the minister who came after Herb Adams and did not like the Reader's Theater. More people came for it than came when she preached. We were taking over and didn't realize it. So it was dropped with her help. Sarah had many things she did not like. And finally, the congregation decided they did not like Sarah and asked her to resign. Paul died in 2001, and in 2002, I left UUFCC because it had too many memories of Paul. I joined UCOV. Many of my friends were there because I lived nearer to Venice than Port Charlotte. After 5 years, I left UCOV. They were not into social action as fully as I was. They wanted to help only the immediate area. I wanted to help the Immokalee farm workers. So I came back to Port Charlotte. You were having demos for the farm workers, trips down to Immokalee, parades with speakers, and there was a giant parade to Lakeland, to Publix headquarters, to urge them to buy tomatoes from the farm workers, which they still do not do. I wonder if this congregation realizes what you show to our community of Port Charlotte County and the areas surrounding it. With Black Lives Matter, you were practically the only white church that supported it. You put up a sign saying Black Lives Matter. It was ripped down again and again. You put it up again, and finally it stayed. It stayed. I'm going to read from a song that was popular in the 1960s because these times of hate, anger, and frustration remind me of the 60s. Then people hated the Vietnam War. Now it is even more serious. They hate each other. How many times can a people look up before they see the sky? And how many ears must a person have before she can hear people cry? And how many deaths will it take till we know that too many people have died? The answer, my friends, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Rosemary, so much for your words, for your memory, and for bringing Bob Dylan into the service. It's always a good day when we can have some Bob Dylan. So thank you so much. Wow, what an honor. What an honor. At this time, I'd like to invite you to share joys and concerns you might have in the chat as we prepare for our time of Book of Life and then a moment of silence. Anything that you might have that's a concern personally or corporately or something in our culture, anything that you might like to share, birthday or anniversary or happy news or a promotion or whatever it might be. This is your time to share your items in our Book of Life, which we are using the chat feature for. So we're going to play an instrumental. There'll be a graphic on your screen, and please take this time to share whatever you would like in the chat room for our Book of Life. Thank you all for sharing. And I know that there's much more that you could share. And so let's remember to keep in our thoughts and in our minds, not just what people have written, but also the many, many items that we haven't written, that we haven't shared, that we know we each carry. So as we enter into a time of silent meditation for just 1 brief minute, I invite you to shut out all the noise. I invite you to let go of your burdens, deep breath in, and breathe it out. Let go of whatever it is that's weighing heavy on your shoulders. And if you have some positive energy, please share that so that we can all enjoy that energy as well. After 1 minute, you'll hear the bowl ding, and then we will sing together, Spirit of Life. So let's enter into a minute of silence at this time. One great purpose of the world's faith traditions is to bring humanity closer to the divine by acts of creation and compassion. One purpose of this congregation is to encourage all who gather here to grow more and more generous in both spirit and in action. Even during this pandemic, when we can only gather virtually online, we continue to take an offering that allows us to exercise that all-important generosity of spirit, an offering that supports our continuing many ministries through this congregation. You can make donations by mailing them here to the office, by auto payment through your bank, or you can give electronically using the Venmo app on your smartphone. And as always, we thank you so much for your continued generosity. And if you keep track of such things, April 1st began our new fiscal year for UUFCC. And that meant Mary Jane spent lots of extra time closing out the monthly books and the annual books and doing lots of extra work. So thank you, Mary Jane, for taking care of that. As I mentioned at the beginning of the service, and we've heard a couple other times, today is the Christian holiday of Easter. Easter celebrates the day on which Jesus rose from the dead. And yes, I've heard somebody today already make zombie Jesus jokes, which I guess we could do as you use. But that was not the story of the Christian faith. One of the reasons that I want to talk about Jesus today, which we don't often do, is I want to make very clear that I am a Jesus fan. I value the teachings of Jesus that we have recorded in the Gospels for many reasons. Jesus focused on people. In his ministry, what we have recorded in the Gospels, we see that Jesus focused on people. And I know that we have a lot of issues with American Christianity. No doubt about that. We have lots of issues with Christianity in various parts of the world. But religion is not the problem. Christianity per se is not the problem. The problem is the organized part of organized religion. That's where the problems come in. See, Jesus was not the founder of Christianity. Jesus never talked about starting a new religion. In fact, he said that his purpose in part was to come to fulfill prophecies, not to change, not to give a new teaching, but to clarify teachings that already existed in what we call the Hebrew Scriptures or the Old Testament, that the religious teachers of the day and that the culture had gotten so very wrong. Jesus came to talk about and to be with people on the margins. Jesus valued sitting with the poor, the sick, the disabled, those who were on the fringes, those who were considered evil or wrong or outcast by even the Jewish leaders of the day. Those were the people that Jesus chose to spend time with, the tax collectors and the criminals and the prostitutes. That was Jesus's village. Jesus very much sounds like a really good Unitarian Universalist, and not so much like an American Christian that we see today. In fact, I would make the case that the Jesus we see in America today, especially through evangelical Christianity, is totally unrecognizable when you compare the teachings of American Christianity to the words of Jesus himself in the Gospels. Often we see Jesus certainly as a white man, and Jesus was clearly not a white man. Jesus was a Palestinian Jew. We often see Jesus as being very tall, sometimes even muscular. You can, in the past several years, you can even find illustrations of Jesus holding a gun with an American flag draped over his shoulder. Absolutely not, never, never, never in a million, billion, trillion years would the Jesus of the Gospels portray himself like that, or even want to be associated with activities and movements like that. Those of us who have been part of Christianity for many years are familiar with the phrase, "What would Jesus do?" WWJD. There was a book that was published about 130 years ago. It was a result of a serial story that was in a newspaper called In His Steps. And in this book called In His Steps, a particular church in this novel challenged all of its members to live by that question, what would Jesus do for one full year? And only do the things that they believe Jesus would do in their particular circumstance. This is something that has been a constant challenge for me for decades, trying to live my life according to what Jesus would do and my understanding and interpretation of Jesus. Not what the church teaches, not what Christianity teaches, not what doctrine teaches, but my own understanding of what Jesus himself said, what that meant to his ministry 2,000 years ago, and what that means for me today. So over the past year, I've asked myself a zillion times, how would Jesus deal with a pandemic? How would Jesus be a minister in a congregation during a pandemic? Jesus was a man of the people. He was always out walking around, traveling, being with crowds. In a pandemic, when you couldn't do that, what would he do? How would Jesus live out his message, the gospel, that God wants good things for us, that people matter, that our environment matters, that being kind to those who are having a difficult time matters? How would he live that out? I want to share with you a coffee cup. This is my wife. Yes, she's looking at me funny now. This is one of Tessa's coffee cups. It says Mom Fuel. Her daughter Leah gave that to her how many years ago? How old is it? Okay, it's several years old at any rate. Tess also has lots of other coffee cups. She enjoys her coffee. And whenever I clean the sink and load the dishwasher, I just pop the lids off and put the cup and the lid in the dishwasher. For some reason, I could never get the lid to pop off of this cup. And so I often just gave up. I got frustrated. I tried to muscle it off. Tess never had any trouble with it, and I could never understand why. So I would just leave it in the sink for her to deal with because I got so frustrated. And then it hit me several months ago why I couldn't pop the lid off. It doesn't pop off. It unscrews. It doesn't pop off. It unscrews. When I looked at the cup differently and I got out of my brain the way I was always trained or assumed that coffee cups work, then I was able to figure it out. But I had to think about it differently in order for that to work. That's always been a really important lesson for me, not just with coffee cups, but in all parts of life. Most of you probably don't know this, but I have 2 master's degrees. I have my seminary degree, and then I have a master's degree in humanity. And my focus in that humanities program in the master's level was creativity studies. And in creativity, what you do is you try to combine 2 or more elements that often aren't combined to come up with something new, and it helps your brain creatively think to solve problems. I want to admit to you today that I've not done a very good job of that when it comes to people and relationships over the past year. I have been so focused on the technology, what we have set up here, monitors and cameras and speakers and earbuds and computers and wires and cords and connections and Wi-Fi and the internet and Zoom and Facebook and all of that, that I've often forgot that the reason that I do what I do, my call to ministry, it's not about technology. It's not about rules and regulations and bylaws and policies and procedures. It's about people. It's about relationships. The ministry of Jesus was first and foremost, and maybe only, about relationships. I have had to retrain myself, especially recently, to challenge my brain to think about people, not policy, to focus on relationships, not rules. As a white American, this is a real challenge for me because I was just always taught and assumed from the culture that I grew up in that rules keep us organized. Rules keep us from experiencing chaos. And not just any rules, but my rules, the rules we agree on as a community. It keeps things nice and neat and in order. And when the rest of my life is absolutely bonkers and out of control, I can go back to the rule book for some sense of normality, for some sense of calm, for some sense of organizing the chaos that I can understand. And sometimes it's important to ignore the rules or to break the rules for the sake of people and relationships. If you grew up in the church and you went to Sunday school or you've done much Bible study, you're certainly familiar of the story of Jesus and his disciples walking down the road on the Sabbath, and they were hungry, so they began to pick food from trees out of the field. Well, the Pharisees saw that happening and ran up to Jesus and said, Jesus, how can you do this? You need to condemn your followers. It's the Sabbath. We cannot do work on the Sabbath, even the work of harvesting food to sustain us. And I can imagine Jesus looking at those Pharisees going, what? You're trying to tell me that it's more important to follow your rules for the Sabbath than it is for these folks to eat? That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Get thee behind me, Satan. Clearly, that's a paraphrase, but that's how I picture that encounter going. Jesus shows us time after time after time that the rules are important. The policies are not prime. The things that govern us shouldn't be what drives us. Rules and policies and procedures exist for us. We don't exist to follow rules and policies and procedures. I realize that I have focused too much, too often, because of my American white culture on the rules and the policies and the procedures. And I have not made relationships and people the most important thing that drives my ministry, my life, and my day-to-day. I realize that I've allowed the rules to become more important than people. And for that, I am deeply, deeply sorry. I thought that rules were keeping me organized and that rules provided me comfort during this pandemic when nothing made sense. And I too often, in fact, daily felt like and still feel like that I didn't know what I was doing. There's no training in how to do ministry during a pandemic. It doesn't exist. There's not a book to read. There's not a workshop or a seminar to go to. There's not even expert consultants that I can call and say, so I'm trying to do this ministry during a pandemic. So I too often simply stood back and took the easy way out and said, well, the bylaws tell us we have to do this. The policy says this is how we do it. And that was wrong, often very wrong. And sometimes that causes harm. I want to absolutely, deeply, and officially to all of you apologize for what I've said, for what I've done over the past few weeks that has caused harm, very real harm to many of you. I know that last Sunday in our chat, some of us were very shocked and upset to see James Abraham's words that he posted, something that he implored the congregation to do about me. What you don't know probably is that Sunday afternoon, James emailed an apology to the office. He said, I am sorry for my words. I apologize to Dan. I apologize to the board. I apologize to the congregation. Do with this apology as you see fit. What I see fit is to share those words with you right now because they matter, and I deeply appreciate that. There's been so many emails flying around about lots of different situations. I didn't think it was a good idea to email out something without more context. And so if that was wrong, again, I apologize for waiting a week. But in this time during our own pandemic, when we're trying to figure out how to live, when our emotions are on edge, when our patience is short, when we're struggling with things that we used to handle with ease, with every little bump of adversity causes us some type of crisis with a lowercase c or an uppercase C. I've often made the wrong decision and made the wrong choice because my own nerves are frayed, because I didn't know what else to do. That reality of me reacting because of being in a pandemic has caused me to make some poor choices, has caused me to be imprudent at times, and has caused harm. And I am so, so sorry for that. How many times have I said over the past few weeks and months, if only we didn't have this pandemic, none of these challenges would happen. If only we could be sitting down face to face, looking each other in the eye. then we could better understand where we're coming from. If only, if only, if only. All of that might very well be true, but it just doesn't matter, because if only isn't our reality. A pandemic is our reality. Not being together in person is our reality, and has been for a year and will be for the next few months as well. If only doesn't matter. What matters is what we have and what's happened. And I am constantly learning day by day, week by week, month by month, how to do this better, how to be a better human, how to be a better minister. I certainly am not acting or reacting to life the way I typically would. Sometimes situations happen that I would normally blow off and I wouldn't even notice, and I wouldn't think a thing about it. And those very same triggers today cause me to get angry or to react very negatively or to feel defensive, when a year ago that would not have been my response. But it is my reality right now. Our emotions are escalated and on edge. We see this in our culture all around us. We're seeing mounting tensions. We're seeing increased violence. We're seeing mass shootings and angry drivers and domestic problems and so many other outcomes. Seems like in the past couple of months, it's gotten so much worse. How much have we seen in the news about mass shootings? So many of them recently. Other acts of violence. There was another one yesterday where people were attacked. It seems like almost daily. See, part of my challenge in dealing with this is that I have been enculturated to default to the rules and the processes instead of the relationship. And when we are not in relationship face to face for an extended period of time, I don't know how to deal with that. Yeah, we do this thing on Sunday mornings. And right now there's 50 something devices logged into Zoom and maybe another 10 or 15 watching on YouTube, which is fantastic. But if we were here in the sanctuary together, you would be nodding your head. You would be laughing at my corny jokes. You would be looking at each other and interacting. But every Sunday for a year, I've had a camera to look into. And I have no idea how you're responding. I have no idea what your nonverbals are trying to communicate. When we're on Zoom meetings for committees or activities, we can see each other electronically, but it's just not the same as sitting together. And the longer this goes on, the more I realize how negatively that impacts me. I am a people person. I'm an extrovert. I'm very social. I need your energy to sustain me. And when that's not happening, I find myself getting frustrated and not handling difficult situations well. I'm not the same person that I was a year ago. I think that in the past year, I've aged 5 or 10 years. If you'll remember, before the pandemic, I had a beautiful head of flowing brunette hair and a wonderful dark beard that everybody was jealous of. And look what's happened to me since then. It's been a hard year. As a liberal religious organization and as your minister, I have failed to keep relationships primary. And for that, I am deeply, deeply sorry. I asked for an opportunity to resurrect those broken relationships. And yes, I use that word resurrect specifically here on Easter. I need to start with my own renewed focus on putting people over processes and relationships over rules. Everything else is secondary. Everything else is secondary. I need to focus on building healthy relationships first and foremost. Healthy relationships give us grounds for vulnerability, to be honest and open with one another, instead of fearing confrontation or being afraid to say what we honestly feel. Healthy relationships gives us the ground for healing, because if we cannot be honest and if we cannot be healthy with one another, all we do is harbor hard feelings and it makes the situation worse. Healthy relationships give us the grounds for beginning to heal with one another. Healthy relationships don't start from an assumption of perfection, because I know I'm not perfect You know you're not perfect. You know I'm not perfect, and I know you're not perfect. We know that no one is perfect. But yet, the desire for all of us to be perfect in and of ourselves and with each other, and for you to be perfect, often drives so much of how we react in different situations. Healthy relationships do not start from an assumption of perfection, but they do require repairing harms that I caused, even partially. Even if I didn't understand at the time what I was doing and how that was harmful. Healthy relationships require striving not to cause harm in the first place, which requires constant attention to my own thoughts, to my own actions, to my own words, and it requires constant growth. It requires working on my own issues and my own behavior so they don't cause harm repeatedly over and over again in the same way. That's how I evidence that I'm learning, that I'm growing, that I'm becoming a better human each and every day as I pay more and more attention to this. The Christian Easter story teaches that Jesus died on Friday and was resurrected on Sunday. Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection happened once, and that one-time event, according to Christian tradition, was sufficient to fulfill God's purpose. God's only begotten Son died as a sacrifice to pay the price for sin for everyone, and was resurrected on Easter Sunday to show that that death and that sacrifice conquered ultimate death over Satan and over evil. That's the Easter resurrection story in about 14 seconds. My own personal resurrection requires me to die many, many, many times to myself, to die to the person I was and to become a new person. My own personal resurrection requires me to keep trying. And continuing to try also means continuing to fail, because to be human means to fail. But failure is not the end of the story. No more than in the Christian Easter tradition is the death of Jesus the end of the story. It means personal resurrection, trying and trying and trying over and over and over again. Trying, learning more, failing, getting back up. Trying, learning more, failing, getting back up. I hope that you don't hear this as me making excuses, because there is no excuse for hurting people. I am so terribly sorry for the ways that I have fallen short, and I pledge to do better as I continue to go through a series of personal resurrections, such as the one that we celebrate, observe, and talk about on Easter. Thank you for your time. Thank you for allowing me to be your minister. I truly do love all of you. I love this congregation, and I hate talking into this damn camera. I can't wait for the day that we can see each other face to face and share handshakes and hugs and laughter and stories and songs and fill this empty sanctuary with our fallen, failed humanity as we continue to try to become better and better as individuals and as a community. Amen and blessed be. Sharon has closing words for us.
Yes, the closing words again are from Reverend Barber. He says, "Not long ago, I was a guest on Real Time with Bill Maher, one of America's most prominent atheists. Wearing my clerical collar, I realized that I stood out among his guests. So I decided to announce to Bill that I too was an atheist. He seemed taken aback, so I explained that if we were talking about the God who hates poor people and immigrants and gay folks, I don't believe in that God either. Sometimes it helps to clarify our language."
Thank you so much, Sharon. A couple of items to share for Life of the Community. First of all, at noon today, we have our monthly Peace Initiative Speaker Series, which we do the first Sunday of the month at noon, sponsored by the Social Justice Committee. The speaker today is Ed Conrad. Ed has a PhD in clinical psychology from Loyola University in Chicago and enjoyed a long career as a therapist, clinical supervisor, and as an educator. He will present an overview of the organization Recovering from Religion, which is so crazy appropriate today given Sharon's words and my message. The mission statement of Recovering from Religion is to provide hope, healing, and support to those who struggle with issues of doubt and non-belief. It's a fully volunteer organization. I would encourage you to stick to where you are and stay around for this presentation at noon. It promises to be very interesting and very timely. Also, our board president, Lori Douglas, has something that she would like to share at this time. So let's go ahead and spotlight Lori. And if you would unmute, please. Lori, the floor is yours, as they say.
Okay, thank you. I'll just take a few moments on a theme that's swirling around. I and the rest of the community, the rest of the board, have received emails and messages from several of you asking for the return of our beloved community. I cannot restore it, and the board cannot restore it. Dan cannot restore it, nor can his presence or his absence. Ginger and James cannot restore it. We can influence it, but all of us, each and every one of us, must restore and repair. To paraphrase from Lisa Presley at UUA, she says, the holy space between each of us is in a loving community is everyone's responsibility to grow and maintain. When it is broken between any people, it is broken between us all. So all I can do is start with me. I made a serious mistake, which ended up hurting those we love and whom we have cherished throughout the years, James and Ginger. It went from there to get a life of its own and lead to further mistrust and division. When we left the board meeting, after discussing the first change in leadership of the new anti-racism group, it was my responsibility to contact Ginger and James prior to that announcement going out. I cannot explain why I did not do it. All I can say is that it was left undone. If I had spoken with them, we may have had a discussion that could have prevented some of this. I would do anything to turn the clock back, but I cannot. I am so very sorry. Throughout these past weeks of turmoil, I have realized once again that my own experiences, including that of a white woman, continue to influence how I interpret and send communications, both verbal and written. I really miss our informal and nonverbal connections and cues, which made it easier and more personal. I will do my best, as will my colleagues, to be better at looking at our communications and processes more carefully, and work to see them as they may be seen by others with different experiences. Hopefully our mistakes will be fewer. I am happy to say that it's highly likely that our UUFC endowment group will fund any external mediation or anti-racism training that we may need to help resolve this. I am also happy to say that your board is not static. We continue to learn and grow from these missteps, and that we are diligently working with your feedback, even though sometimes you cannot always see it. We also truly appreciate the notes of support that many of you have sent. Awareness and apologies are the first steps. It is in the actions and in our actions of reparations that we heal. I wish you all a happy Passover, a happy Easter, and a blessed Ramadan. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori, for those important and heartfelt words. I didn't know what Lori was going to say. She didn't know what I was going to say, but it sounds like the message